Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are here on YouTube and you see a little link down below, you can click on it and you'll become, you'll go end up in Zoom. Once you're in Zoom, you'll see another little link. You can click on that and you can become part of the producer group. Basically, you're running the show. We don't have a run of show. We don't have a plan for the first hour. We just say there'll be questions, and every day we assume that there'll be questions, and we all depend on you to create those questions. So. Come in, ask questions early, and vote on those questions. It really defines the entire process. We spend more time at the top of the hour answering questions in the bottom. So what you vote on, or what you post early, and also what you vote on has the highest chance of us talking about it in detail. So we're really dependent on that. Now, if you want to be part of the panel, if you want to become more part of the community, there's different levels of, you can be sitting there watching on YouTube, and then you can join the Discord and be part of that. Then you can join the panel and really deepen your connection here. And to do that, you just need to be here by 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for us to do mic checks. You can come in a little earlier, as early as 6, to see if your kit is ready and you're all set up for it. So feel free. We're talking about whatever we're talking about after 6, but we're really here to check your system. So if you just go ahead and barge in and say, I'd like to check my mic or my cameras, and that's totally fine. At 7 o'clock, we start general conversation. So that is any question you have about media or virtual production, we'll start talking about it then. And then the second hour, we spend a little bit more time on something we want to dive into. Today, we're going to be talking about Supersources, which are kind of the multiple video frames you may see in a newscast or in other shows. And we'll talk about how we make them and how we manage them. So we'll be talking about that today. Tomorrow is the long day. The second 2 hours, 8 to 10, is education. And then at 10 o'clock, now we've got Nick Justin coming in from Drexel University, and we'll be talking more about MetaHuman and Unreal. So how do we create the MetaHuman, and how do we get MetaHumans into Unreal? Then next week we'll be talking about how do we actually attach our phone to the face of a MetaHuman so you can make the MetaHuman move like a little puppet. Now we're going to change gears completely in the middle of the day at noon to 2. Now we're going to be doing tests. We're doing a lot of stuff with Matt in the kitchen. We're going to be doing a test recipe. So there's no structure to it. We all kind of just turn our cameras on and we start going through a recipe, and that recipe went out in your morning email. So the recipe for both the test kitchen, which is at noon, and the actual show is at 5. You can actually cook along at 5 as well in Zoom with all of us, or watch the show and look at the production. But at noon, we're just doing a test, and we're saying, well, did that actually work, and what utensils did we need? And it's a lot of fun. So I would highly recommend it. Anyway, that's what we've got going on. Bill, I assume we have a couple questions stacking up.
We do have a couple of questions stacking up, and the first one comes to us from Scott Mueller. And Scott asks, whoops, I'm in the wrong place. Excuse me for just a second while I get my display set up correctly. Scott Mueller says, what kind of apps and techniques are there to create a dynamic animated countdown clock that you could change the font of to suit the vibe of the meeting?
So I actually think this is a pretty important question. This is something I spend a lot of time on. I'll show you a couple examples of some of the stuff that I've done in the past. Let's see if I can get this to work here. So this is, so you'll see it down below. And one of the things that I think is really great is to think about how to, if we look at some of these, let's see here, let's go to the top. So really finding a way to look at the client's font and kind of figure out how to make it feel like it's part of the other assets that they're giving us. So, you take that text and really figure out that one. I didn't have this thing in there, but see at the bottom, but really trying to find the font, find the feel for, exactly what that should look like. I really feel like it's part of that process, and it really depends on, in that area. I know a lot of people the reason I show these is that a lot of people will just kind of put up a countdown clock. And the main thing is that really figuring out how the countdown clock is part of your show, feels like it's an integrated part of the show is really important. So not just picking any old font and not just having a still frame. It's really great to think about it, how it's integrated into that. So I spend a lot of time building those countdown clocks. I build them all in Motion. I used to do it with having the countdown timer go backwards. Now I'm still learning how to do it, but Alex Gollner has a better way of doing it, which is, animating each character or each group together, which at the right pace. And you have a lot more control. So yeah, that's what he's doing for Mad in the Kitchen. If you look at that file, so I'm still learning how to do that one. But what I have been doing is basically taking the timer, the SMPTE timer, and cutting off the ends, and then I make 3D ones. I make all kinds of stuff in motion, but you can do it in After Effects as well. You just reverse the flow, and that's what I would recommend. Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, what do you guys think of this one from Live Streaming Pros? These are ones that you can buy. She usually does stuff in the background, muted while there's music playing. So here she's dancing. I know Victor's familiar with these guys. What do you think, Victor?
Yeah, I like those. I made my own in motion, the one I'm currently using, and like you said, Alex, I incorporated the right font and the right color. Give you a little kind of, and it works out pretty well that way. Let me see if I have mine up here. Yeah, there you go, something like that. So,
I think video doesn't hurt. Like there's different levels of pre-show, which I highly recommend. So, I recommend almost never going live out of the gate at the top of the hour, like right when you had scheduled. There's a whole bunch of technical reasons not to do that, and there's a couple audience reasons. So we try to open the gates at 20 minutes out, 10 minutes minimum for every show that we do. It gives the audience time to go. Depending on the CDN that you have, it gives the edge time to warm. You have to remember things like if you're going live to YouTube, YouTube takes its sweet time to get that out for its own reasons. And so it doesn't send out all of those notifications right when you say go live. It sends them out over the next 3 to 5 minutes, as does Facebook. And so you'll notice that the announcement at the top of our show is 3 to 5 minutes long. That's not by accident. So we start that. We come out of the gate that way, but we know what we know how we're going into that. But with a lot of shows, you really want to think about what can you do to give the audience time. And the best thing to do is actually a pre-show. People talking, taking questions, warming up the audience. That's what you'd see if you go to David Letterman. Second best way to do it is movies, like just play out some VODs that you had before, or make some stuff that is really cool. Third best way is the countdown clock, which is what we're talking about here. And you can also merge those two. You can have the countdown clock sitting over top of the videos, or over top of the piece, and that's a nice way to do it. The worst way to do it is a still, saying starting soon. That's you'll lose 75% of your audience over a couple minutes forever with a still. So it's a good way to do a lot of damage to your viewership. Go ahead, Chris, and then Leland, and then Bill.
I would caution against using anything that's pre-built or a stock item that you can purchase. It's never bad to give somebody a little extra. It's always awesome when you can actually charge them for building something custom. But the number one reason for not using either stock music or a stock item is that sometimes that same element can be very embarrassingly used in another product, and all of a sudden your client gets associated with something that's awkward and sometimes horribly embarrassing.
Yeah, be careful of music too, because a lot of the needle drops that are inexpensive are used in a lot of things, and they're actually claimed by other folks within their YouTube videos. So you can start off your show in a horrible way. Go ahead, Leland.
Yeah, totally agree with the branding principle that's involved in that timer in the beginning. Just for people doing quick one-offs for themselves, Time and Date has these cute little animated graphic timer countdowns that you can use for any event. But if you're using vMix, you could actually create your own very simply. Create an input for either an image or a video file, and then use the GT graphics designer for the title template, where you can change the font and the type of countdown that the timer represents with simple date and time codes that are available in the vMix users manual. So you could go ahead and fancy that up in any format that you would want it in, create that as your first splash, and then start your broadcast after.
Yeah. And when you can, I would highly recommend building the skill set up to do your own countdown clocks, because when it comes to working with your clients, building something that looks really designed, they notice it. And mostly what happens is when they use somebody else, they notice that it's missing. So they're like, oh, we didn't get that little countdown clock. And that puts a little, has it more likely they'll come back to you. Go ahead, Bill, and then Victor.
Yeah, I was just going to say same thing. When I saw the first one that Guy put up, I thought, what is this show? Cooking with the Coven? Why do I have a burning ring of fire around this woman in the kitchen? Victor's was much more consistent because he's modern, he's playing jazz, and that's what that looked like. So sometimes I find that people who use packaged things don't really use them with thought. They go, that's cool, I'll just use that. And it has no connection to the content or the feeling of what they're trying to do. And that's a lower level of design aesthetic.
And to be clear, like most of those countdown clocks I showed you took me 30 minutes maybe to make, because you ask for the assets from the client. The client gives you some assets, you whack them into Photoshop, and you throw the timer in that you've already built, and it takes very little to render it out. Yeah, Victor.
And what I'm doing when that countdown clock is going is I'm talking to the audience, the people that are coming into YouTube and they're chatting. Welcome, so-and-so, glad you're here. Good to see you again. I'm having that discussion to warm up the audience to me. Don't forget to put comments in. I love the comments, that kind of thing. It makes a huge difference in engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. Sky.
We've been using, since you recommended it months back, quiz at the beginning of our House of Worship on Sunday. And it's actually become a feature because people are now looking forward to the quizzes. And apparently there's lots of them out there. So we don't really, it's like kind of a little mini Sunday school. It's kind of fun.
You got to be careful of whatever feature you add, because people will get attached to it. Somebody will, and then they'll get real vocal if you take it away. So that's why you're always got to be careful of how many you add. But that's a great one. That's a great
But
one.
again, we're trying to get ahead of the Baptists because our food chain, our pipeline was so fat, and then it got really narrow.
There's a show there somewhere.
So we had to get in there ahead of the church up the street.
Yeah. Next question.
Jay Horsley of what looks like Mulvane, Kansas, says, looking for to upgrade my video on Zoom on an M1 Macbook Air. These Logitechs are in stock locally, the C920, the 922 Pro, and the Streamcam Plus. Is the 4K version worth it? Is there a better way to spend up to $200 on video? I have separate audio, so that's not a consideration with the camera.
The Brio is significant. We've pretty much standard on it. The 920 is great, and I've used it for years. The Brio is significantly better in the sense that you can reframe at 1080. So you get a 4K, you have a 4K frame to work inside of. And even for yourself, it just means that you can sit there and go, I'll just move around a little bit. I don't have to figure out how to make my chair higher or how to move the camera. I can make final adjustments with it inside of that. That's what we send out. The Huddle Cam is great as well. It's just a little bit more expensive and heavier, which has become what was our big problem. Was it's just too big for what we do. And so the Brio turns out to be a better solution for us. But those are both really solid cameras. The Streamcam is great, but it doesn't give us the same advantages as the Brio. Go ahead, Leland.
I've been researching a little mini PTZ camera out there. You guys have probably seen the OBS bot. You can find it on Amazon. It's on sale right now, actually, for $169 versus $199. It's very mechanically sound from what I see. So I would recommend anybody that's looking for a small unit on their desktop or something like that to look into it.
Next question.
Chris Comfort here in the panel from New York City and says, has anyone used Davinci Resolve's live mode to process a live feed for use in a Zoom meeting or other stream? Is it even feasible?
Yeah, go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, we tried it a few months ago, and we were on a Mac Pro 24 core with a Radeon 2 Duo something, and it was the only machine that we could get to not have sync go completely off.
Yeah.
We tried it on my machine, and as soon as we turned it on, now you have to have some extra decks, so you can't record and play live at the same time. But the sync and the processing and the intels, like you have to have a pretty beefy machine to get it to work. It seemed cool, but the only time that I see that being used is on set by the DITs and the daily colorist and all that stuff.
What we've done,
Zoom,
what we've done for it, used it for is specifically just that it gives you a real-time view of your camera that you can shade. So you can sit there and shade the camera, and not shade it, but actually build a LUT for it, and save it out as a cube and put it on the camera. So you can say, this is the feed that's coming out. This is what I'm going to do to it. Get it to a point where you're happy with it, and then save it and put it on something. And that has been I think that's more of the way it's intended to be used, in that sense. Go ahead, Chris.
Charles, when you say it drifted, was it a gradual increase, or was it a set drift or a set offset or delay or whatever?
On On the MacBook Pro that was attached to many other things, it just kept getting worse. But the big bump happened as soon as we turned on Resolve and we had Zoom going, and, and you could just see the drift starting to happen. And there was a serious lag in the video frames that were being output to Zoom. You could see the steppiness and the stuttering.
It's really, that would be using it in a way that's not built. I mean, it's really built to do that on-set, make adjustments, save out those adjustments. It's not really built for performance, like the real-time performance, and it's definitely not built for audio. So what Charles is talking about would be exactly what you would expect, because they're not really paying much attention to that. They're just trying to color the frames. Next question.
Doug Ferguson in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and here on the panel, do you charge for media gathering after a project, such as copying camera media?
Usually we hire an archivist for a lot of our shows. So if there's anything more than just a program, if it's just a program, sometimes not. But if we have ISOs and other records and everything else, we hire someone to pay attention to it. It's because it takes somebody to pay attention to it. So because that's their show. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, definitely that responsibility is usually handled by the DIT and or the media wrangler. And yes, those are billable hours.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
David Brady of New York is in next with, I've been trying to get my head around adding a Zoom meeting with talent into a Zoom webinar for the audience, but I feel like I'm missing something. Could Alex illustrate the signal flow for those of us who are visual learners?
Yeah. Hold on. I thought I could, and then I realized that I had somehow turned off my Wacom tablet. Let me turn it back on here and see if everything's working. Let's come back. Hold that question for a second.
Sure.
I bumped my power before the show, and evidently I need to come back to that. Yeah, let's go to the next question.
Okay, Ian Alford in London is up next and says, working on production from home with little time means unhealthy snacks. What do you eat to stay healthy when working hard?
Nuts. Nuts and beef jerky for me. Like specifically, anyway, yeah. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, I'm sort of obsessed with trying to stay fit so I can have a long and healthy life. So if I'm going to be on set, I try to have pistachios, cashews, a lot of peanuts to have healthy fats. And then I try and find a source of lean protein, and I will make some sandwiches or buy some rotisserie chicken for like $5 at the local grocery store, and I'll have it with me. I personally, if I'm not eating, the quality of work is gonna start to go down. So.
The big thing I try to stay away from is a lot of sugar. It just makes it harder to concentrate in the afternoon. You'll notice if I'm doing Crafty, if I'm managing Crafty, if it's our responsibility, there'll be almost no sugar until like 4 o'clock, and that's the afterburner. That's the afterburner. Like 2 hours before the end of the day, I'll give you M&Ms. And the thing is it'll bump you up, and after that, it's your problem. So you can eat as many M&Ms as you want, because I know that the crash will happen after the call time ends. Go ahead, Chris.
The trick with caffeine is that it's not really giving you energy. It's squeezing your adrenal glands to force more energy out of those. So eventually you're going to crash on that. So just be very careful about how much coffee you drink, thinking you're going to get more energy. And if you do that one day, that's fine. But if you keep doing that over and over again, you're just borrowing against your debit. It's a debit. So
yeah, I try to drink very little coffee. Most of the time I have a cup in the morning to hang out with all of you. And then I might have a smaller one at noon or something like that, but that's it. And part of the reason I do that, in fact, if I know a production's coming up, I'll drink actually less coffee going into the production, so that it's actually useful when I'm there. Like if I need it, I can turn it on. I can flip the switch and stay up. Go ahead, Charles.
And to add, I might be the only person on the panel that doesn't drink coffee or drink anything aside from.
There's a couple. No, Chris
really?
doesn't drink.
Yeah,
there's a couple people. Yeah,
I'm the only person in my family, so I'm like the black sheep.
We call it the Mickey elixir, because look what it did for him.
I do make up for it.
I just like it so much. So like the problem is I like making coffee. So I think that's the problem. All right, next question.
Luca Pasquale Giannini of Montreal, Canada is up next. Can you please elaborate on what makes a good overlay design and what makes a bad overlay design?
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, just I'm going to throw it quickly. If it distracts from the forward movement of the story, if it becomes the story, then is that your intention? Or is it just something, as somebody was mentioning earlier, flaming and you thought it was cool, but has absolutely nothing to do with the content that you're trying to promote and push?
It's super easy for people, designers, to get really into, especially, you can always tell people who are designing lower thirds and that kind of thing for the first time, because they're really out there. Like there's like tons of animation and there's flashes and there's fire and there's light flares and there's all kinds of other stuff. And then people who do this a lot are like, there's number one is there's the practicality of it, of just how it needs to work in a day-to-day basis. And there's also there is a, are you distracting from the conversation? So someone's watching something, does that, to Sky's point, does that graphic seamlessly add something to the experience, or does it, because there's times, so when a person comes up, you want to know who they are. Who is that person? So a lower third makes sense. When you're looking at a race, you want to see what's everybody's, timers, so that graphic is valuable. So there's things that you think about, and the best way to think about it, hopefully, is as a viewer, you watch it and go, in my mind, what shows up, I wish I could see it. And if I wish I could see it, then maybe there should be a graphic there. The other thing you have to take care of with graphics is remember that, oh, by the way, Bill, I got my telestrator working, so we can do that other question. But the remember that this area down here, sometimes this area up here, sometimes this area over here, are all being taken up by the streaming platform that you're using. So you have to be kind of conscious to, a lot of times we will run tests of streams and see where the bubble's going and where is this going and where is that going and where's the, all of those things, make a difference for what we're doing. And so those are the other things you want to kind of keep in mind is, what are your blackout areas? And oftentimes it changes all the time. So I don't have a set one, but I have templates in Photoshop that are little overlays that I drop down. So when I'm designing the graphics, this is the most recent YouTube overlay thing that I can't, dead areas that I can't use, or Facebook. Facebook is one of the worst as far as that goes, or TikTok. TikTok has tons of graphics all over it. So you have to think about that too. Go ahead, Bill, and then Grant.
I just wanted to note, there are also stylistic choices sometimes. Famously in the Indiana Jones movie, the plane that went from one place to another as a location transition was consistent with the era of the 30s that they were trying to bring back visually. So sometimes art directors will make graphics communicate that way.
Right. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I was just going to make a note that sometimes you don't have the capacity to do lower thirds and graphics. And that if you had to choose over content and connecting with your community, I would always choose no graphics, because it's one of those things that you could be distracted by trying to do a bunch of lower thirds with all the different people, and miss an important switch or miss a play out or something, and you kind of wreck your show, and you're trying to make it better. And you're getting distracted by it. So I kind of shy away from it, because I don't think it actually makes a big difference in the types of shows that we're doing now. Yeah,
I tend to agree. I mean, one of the things is that for most of our shows, we have graphics operators, and if we don't have a graphics operator, we're not really doing any graphics. Or we have somebody that's dedicated to graphics and play out and everything else. There's a person that's their only job, is to make that work. Go ahead, Chris, and then Mark, and then Tim.
I would say, I would take it one step further, Alex. I wouldn't say just a graphics operator, but a graphics producer. And I think that to what Grant was just saying is that to just add an element, you can get confused. But what you really want to do is take advantage of the fact that you have this big screen, you have people's attention. People are exceptionally good at absorbing additional levels, second and third level reads of information. Why not take advantage of it? What might seem like a distraction can really add another level of learning experience to the screen. But it has to be produced. It can't be a second. It can't be a throwaway.
It's part of the show.
It's absolutely part of the show. And if you've ever sat in a sports truck during a live sporting event, there's a team of 3 or 4 people in the back that are doing nothing but the graphic overlays. And all they're doing is yelling to the front of the truck, font's good, and now the director knows, I can put this one in.
Right. Yep, absolutely. Mark?
Yeah, I would say two additional factors you may want to consider. And the second one I think you'd definitely consider. Firstly, if you have a color template that you've already associated with your brand, so to speak, maybe consider staying within that template. Things can get really wild sometimes that seem to have nothing to do with the rest of your presentation. Fire, for example, may or may not be appropriate. Secondly, accessibility, I think, is really important, especially as it applies to contrast and text size. And again, the wildness can take over there as well. But a lot of times simple, I think Steve Jobs, a lot of times simple is really better.
Well, and one of the things that we do is we tend to want it to be generated at 2160, so 4K. We generate the graphics at 4K by automatic. That's like our automatic, but we make sure they're readable at 640 by 360. Like they, so we will always scale things down. I'll always scale it down so at 640 by 360, I can still read all the graphics if I'm generating those to make sure that because you just don't know what people are, even on a phone that might have a higher resolution, it's effectively that for a lot of people. And so you just have to remember that. It's one of the things we learned with the overlays for Mad in the Kitchen last week is we spent a lot more time in 4-ups and the mobile experience is not great. so we're gonna, so that I was like, oh, right. Yeah, that's, so we'll have to, we'll keep on playing with that. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, Alex, what do you think about the like we do a lot of lower third lyrics and stuff like that for songs in our church services and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen any creative ways to do that, like more than just looking like closed captioning?
Oh yeah.
What are some?
Yeah, I mean, I think Pro Presenter, or is it Presenter Pro or Pro Presenter?
Pro Presenter.
I think it has a fair number of ways to do that, but a lot of them are designed around full screen, presentation of those. Mm-hmm. I do think that if you're going to do songs, it makes sense to give everybody the lyrics, and I think that you can think through. You can, depending on, you should be able to design the fonts inside of those, but it's the lyrics are super important for that area. But you should be able to design fonts and layovers. And we'll jump to Jeff real quick, and then to Doug, and then Courtney.
I'm involved with my church every Sunday, so we use Pro Presenter 7, which has a secondary output, so you can not only send your full screen to your screens or multiple screens, as we do, and then also you can actually create a specific lower third, which has those lyrics resized and fitting look all complete with that, and that's working really well for us.
Yeah, go ahead, Doug, and then Courtney, then we'll move on.
Yeah. To Chris's point, we produce the graphics. I mean, we have a purpose for the graphics, and we do such a wide range of projects, that sports to virtual events. But on our virtual events, we have taken some of our, we create really nice opens, really nice closes, some lower thirds. And I tell you, we approach the webinars as like a broadcast versus just a traditional, Zoom meeting, because most people can do a Zoom meeting, but we can do the cool graphics and the cool telling of the story a little bit better. So it is, have some intention with it when you do it.
Courtney?
Yeah, my rule is that if you have to do an animated lower third for identification for a person's name, if you want to animate it in, that's fine. It should take less than a second to animate in, and then stop. Don't do continuous rolling animation in a lower third, because it's distracting and it draws your attention down. It's great to draw your attention to the name the first time it appears. That lets it identify the person. You can even fade it off. Don't even animate it off because it's too distracting if it's moving any other time than appearing.
One of the things that we like, to your point, we do like to do animated in, because that draws your eye to it if we want to say something, and then we fade out because we're like, okay, you saw it. Okay, now we're gonna step away, step quietly out because you already got what you needed. All right, next question.
And it's the David Brady question that we held from earlier. I've been trying to get my head around adding a Zoom meeting with talent into a Zoom webinar for the audience, but I feel I'm missing something. Could Alex telestrate the signal flow for us visual learners?
Yeah, so we're putting a Zoom meeting in, but remember, we're doing individual connections. So if you think about, there's a main room for the meeting, and then we have a breakout room for each participant. In that breakout room, we have a Zoom room sitting inside of each one of these breakout rooms. So basically, it's like a point-to-point meeting with each Zoom room. The Zoom rooms go out HDMI, but then are converted to SDI because they can't see the deck link. Not that I'm bitter. And then we go out to, for us, a switcher. This is an ATEM for us. This is an ATEM constellation that goes out into. So now we have the whole show in here. Now we can add graphics, lower thirds, whatever we want. It's just a show at that point. We're also out of these computers through Dante. We are going to our mixer and doing a mix minus to each one of them. So we now have complete control over audio and video within all of the pieces. It's one meeting for the panelists. Then this just goes out as a show to the to the webinar. Now, if you want two-way, then you have the webinar. We have another Zoom room that's inside that webinar that does the same thing. It passes video back into the switcher, and audio goes out to the mixer, and we do the same mix minus back to that. So you can have it have the webinar individuals interacting with the folks that are in the meeting, but each person in the meeting is there. Now, there's a couple things we have to also decide. What are we returning back to these rooms? And so we may use everything from a multi-view, a 16 multi-view, or 4x4 multi-view, or even other switchers that will provide super sources that are specific to the people so that we can give them messaging and show each other and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how that, hopefully that signal flow, that visual representation of how we do that makes sense.
Can you also discuss the etiquette question that we're exploring with the home chefs? Is that appropriate? As far as because we're trying to take some of the mechanics of it and put the human factor back in of when to interrupt, like me not raising my hand just now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that for one this big, we would definitely have we'd have people usually raise their hand before they start talking. but for a smaller group of people, I think that one of the things, especially when everyone's doing something, I kind of think we're going to move towards more people just kind of interjecting, because it's only 4 or 5 people. What we're finding with the cooking thing is that it makes more sense for us to all just kind of talk to each other while we're doing it, as if you were in an open area. So we're still experimenting with that, but in a more creative environment where people are doing stuff, it's kind of hard to raise your hand because you're in the middle of doing something. So, and everybody's in the middle of doing something and talking. So it's a slightly different structure from what we're doing there, but we're still figuring that out. Next question.
Chuck Wojak of Concord, California is up next. And he said, I had a fun problem last week on an event. The guest was on wired internet using a DSLR and looked and sounded good. Unforeseen problems was after 4 days, their internet upload seemed to be throttled. The signal was almost unusable by the 4th day. Have you ever seen that? And do you know of any solutions?
1.2 terabytes. Now, someone's got an open mic. 1.2 terabytes is the standard Comcast limit if you don't call and complain. So if they were on Comcast, and it's probably different for everybody, but I can tell you it's 1.2 for us, or it was. So 1.2 terabytes, once they go over that, they'll get heavily throttled. So if they were there the whole time and uploading all that data and managing it, they could have gotten to the limit that their ISP has put on them. Now, if they're lucky and they're not in a contract with their ISP, they can angrily call the ISP and say, I'm going to leave, because you throttled me, blah, blah, blah. And the ISP will say, hey, if you'll sign up for a year, we'll probably, a lot of times they'll just give it to them for free. The unlimited access. In fact, we negotiated going from 300 down and 10 up to 1 gig down and 50 up with unlimited bandwidth. And we got $20 off or $30 off than what we were paying before. So it's right now the ISPs are in a fragile position because of 5G and because of Elon Musk and everything else. And we as users who have been beaten for a long time by them should leverage it. Like don't feel bad, call them and just rake them along the asphalt. Like they deserve it. They had it coming to them. So what you should be asking for, you should find out, we should basically collude amongst ourselves and figure out what in different areas, what can we actually ask for, and then, pound that as hard as we can because they have it coming to them. Go ahead, Keenan.
So, and I know you don't like this, but if you do the Comcast Advanced Security Gateway at a home user, I'm not saying for a business, they will give you unlimited data. They took the 1 terabyte cap off, or the 1.2. My house just went to 800 down and I think 30 up, but it's specifically in their terms of service with Comcast that if you do their $25 router a month, they take that cap off. So not a great idea for businesses. Obviously that router's kind of, it's okay. But for some of your remote sites, that might be an option to get that cap lifted without
I got that,
a lot of.
and to be clear, I got that same deal with a surfboard. So I don't have I won't use their modem, and they gave me the same deal. You just have to, but of course, my wife is very persuasive. I didn't do it. I just had her call. She's very good at this. Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, it's interesting what you just said. That's why I put my hand down. But when I got the surfboard, which by the way didn't help me at all because the wires in my building are awful.
He's looking for the word that he could say.
Yes, because I have a lot of other choice words that come before the word awful. Yeah. What I was going to say is, when I switched to the surfboard, they said, "Oh, well, to get the unlimited data, we have to charge you an extra $30."
We told them that too. They told us that too, and then my wife said, "No, well, we'll just go. We're going to research. Going somewhere else." And, oh, you mean
so? In my location, the alternative is 40 megabits down from AT&T.
Right. That's the problem.
I have no alternative, and Comcast doesn't care. They can't change the wires in my building. They're not allowed to. They're not contracted to do Comcast gets the wire to the building, and then from my wall to my router. But all the stuff in the walls, they have no control over, and their cables are 20 years old and splitted, and there's little 6x splitters in wall panels. It's awful.
Yeah, this is why we can't have any good things. Like, no, it's the, I mean, it's because we haven't done what is necessary with cable. Anyway, Al.
Yes.
Yeah, just to throw a bit of a Canadian twist, you guys have it really, really well down in the United States. Up here in Canada, it is just terrible. It is just really terrible. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when Starlink starts migrating north and see what happens up here. But stay away from Canada's internet.
Yeah, it's horrible. I've been there. Next question.
Ian Alford of London, England says, on a theme, working on a production can take all your energy and time. What do you do for effective exercise?
Many of us are like, and what do we do? Go ahead, Charles.
So on a theme that we were on before, I'm very concerned about my health, as we all should be. My theory is I need to train myself to be able to sit down all day long, because that's essentially what we do. I love going to the gym. Since we all have relationships with different things, like work changes and clients changes or spouses change, but I've always found that I can compare myself to a 45-pound plate at the gym, and I know where I stand because that will never change.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it's hard at times. I understand we do work very long hours, but I make the time to make sure that I'm okay. In the last year, I've had a lot of colleagues from Nickelodeon to BET to networks. They've been sitting at home and they all now have back problems
right.
that they never had before. I think it's a growing issue that needs a much longer conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead. We're going to move pretty quickly, but this is good. I definitely want to cover this, and then we'll start speeding up. Go ahead, Bill, and then Chris.
I can't use it, obviously, during office hours, but I will say that the Apple Watch, and I do believe the other smart watches do the same thing now, that pings every hour and says, get up and move around for just a few minutes. You get so deep into editing or whatever your task is that you can find yourself in 3 hours just looking up and going, oh my gosh, where has the day gone? So that timed break that comes regularly during my workday and that just makes me not be totally sedentary for long multi-hour stretches, I find that really valuable.
I drink a lot of water and then I don't need the timer. Go ahead, Chris.
My partner and I started our Ergonomics for Musicians program. It's called Be Neutral, and that's based on my other ergonomics program, which is ergonomics in the home workspace. And you would be surprised at how getting your musculoskeletal system in balance and can help with energy, help with functioning of your organs and all those things. So if somebody wants to hit me up on Discord, I can talk about that.
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'm amazed at what I didn't know in high school when I was like a meathead, just lifting, bench press and squats and all that stuff. And now I learned from like Beachbody On Demand, some of these yoga exercise. And I got to tell you, man, when I was 20 years old, having back problems from just sitting on Photoshop for 8 hours a day, it all went away doing these yoga moves. So now my lower core is just like super rock solid from doing these crazy exercises. So now it's just 3 minutes a day of yoga and then 10 to 20 minutes a day on the elliptical. And that's all I need. Well, and I do some pull-ups as well, some bodyweight exercises. And
if you have an Apple Watch and you're looking at the Apple Fitness Plus, it's amazing. Like I've done a lot of those kind of Beachbody and other things, and they've been successful. The Apple one is like 10 minutes and I can't move. like 10 minutes, I am like wiped out. I look at ones that are like 20-minute hits on the Apple Fitness going, I better be ready for that. Like I might have to work out a little bit to get ready for those because they're pretty heavy duty. And the yoga ones are really good. Right now, because of some production, I'm not able to do jujitsu, but I can do the exercises, the warm-up exercises in the morning, which are pretty useful. A lot of rolls, falls, things like that. So it's good. It's a good little exercise. Get the blood moving. All right. And the other thing is just I eat every day. I eat less and less that's packaged. That's like I'm going more and more to single ingredients, and I just don't want it's just about being efficient, just making sure the machine is getting what it needs. I just make everything from scratch. And it doesn't take very long. You just pick the things that are easy to make from scratch. Next question.
Scott Mueller, Clinton Corners, New York, says Magewell SDI to USB converter. Is this the best solution, or is there a better way to get a cleaner image? Essentially, come out of a Panasonic 410 switcher into a Decimator, into a Magewell, into a Zoom camera input.
In that case, I'm not sure what you need the Decimator for, is the only thing I would say. Magewell should be able to see it without the Decimator. So, that shouldn't be there. Shouldn't be needed. Depending on the price, the Magewell's great. We've had many of them, 10 or 20 of them that we've used. My tendency would be towards a web presenter just because it gives you more stuff that you can do with it. It gives you some telemetry if you decide to stream with it. And it's a great webcam interface, for that. And the new one is now 1080. So, another switcher, ATEM switcher, go out of that and into there. But for SDI, I would say probably the web presenter. It would be the one I would consider. Next question.
Edward R. Ruiz in Chicago. Can the panel recommend some motorized concert lights for a live stream concert with a small stage? Bonus points for a controller to do this all with the best dollar to wow ratio. Thanks.
Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, there's lots of options out there. I've come across, if you're looking for the prosumer area, probably stick with Chauvet, American DJ. They have lots of different options in that area. The controller is going to be your biggest issue. I would say probably take a look at getting something that is ArtNet controllable so that you can use your iPhone, something like that. There are many options. I use Luminaire, which is a great app, and they keep it really up to date. It can also control your lights in your home as well. So there's a couple of options for you. If you're looking up a bit, you look at Martin Lighting. You're looking at almost triple or quadruple the pricing for lighting in that range.
Next question.
Chris Roysden in Round Rock. What is the metal tubing used to build set pieces and often used for trade show properties? It's been mentioned before, but I can't remember the name.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
80/20.
Well,
I think it's if that's what we've talked about before was for building pieces, but
for trade show properties,
extrusion.
It's a lot of times. So 80/20 is amazing. For trade show booths, we see more of truss, which is trusses and speed rail. Speed rail is more of something we see in sets in studios. And usually Hollander is the one that makes most of the well-known. There's some other people that make it, but Hollander is the one that makes most of the connections that we use for that. Speed rail is cheap. The Hollander connections are expensive when they add up because there's lots of them. Then 80/20 is what we see almost every control room that we work in built out of. So it's, control rooms are all like just based on it. And then again, truss of various sizes are typically what we see in trade booths. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, again, look at VersaTruss. Global Truss is probably one of the largest manufacturers of self-standing trusses. VersaTruss, believe it or not, it's just lives here in Ontario. They're not too far away from me. And then Christie Lights, of course, if you're looking for trussing, those guys have it all too.
And the good thing is that once you start, there's a lot of CAD setups and templates that'll have a lot of the stuff all built into it. So if you're building something that you can throw it together relatively quickly, they usually make those kinds of things available inside of even like SketchUp and those types of things so you can throw it together. Next question.
Rupert McCrae's back from Dallas, Texas. Back in October, Zoom announced Zoom Room's Smart Gallery on the roadmap for 2021. This was going to use AI to pick out in-room participants and present them as individual frames in a normal gallery view to remote participants, different to immersive. Any news or thoughts on this feature and or thoughts on this feature?
I don't have any thoughts about that. I didn't really pay much attention to it. So, no. Okay, next question.
You've seen a lot of things announced at trade shows. It didn't actually come to fruition. So old technologies.
And I will admit that I'm pretty bad at being just, low, I tend to be high tech, but low tech of just, I want the basic simple things. How do I make the basic things work all the time as opposed to newer things? So some of the newer cool features of stuff I tend to be very slow to move to. Next question.
Charles Klein here in New York City from the panel right now. Currently, about 60% of the global population has internet access, and the large majority use only mobile devices. What tech does this panel think will help us reach the remaining 40%?
Elon Musk. Go ahead, Chris.
My question is, why do we have to reach them?
Oh, it's a lot of opportunity. There's a big reason for it. I mean, so.
But if you're talking about moving from mobile to.
Oh no, I think that.
What are you saying,
mobile
Charles,
to
desktop.
No,
or from nothing to something.
Well, yeah, it's nothing to something is what we're talking about, and there's a huge advantage to having access to information. So a good example is farmers in Kenya. Farmers in Kenya don't know what the price is in the market. And so so people who come to buy their corn or plantains or whatever, basically will tell them what the price, they think the price is, and they'll shake them down for a certain price that they think they can get because the farmers don't know better. Once the farmers are able to collude with each other and understand what the actual market rates are, they're able to get better prices. This is actually one way that internet has been used in the last decade in Africa. By giving the farmers, connectivity, they're actually able to get more money for their goods. It basically took leverage out of the middle person. In fact, it almost eliminated them. So there's a whole nother problem. But the middleware folks started getting cut out because the farmers could then negotiate directly and essentially start building futures for their for their corn. And that's something that we have the advantage of here. That was not something that was available without the technology and without the connectivity in Eastern Africa. Go ahead, Bill, and then George.
I know that it's still a ways away, but if real 5G, that stuff that's close to the speed of landline copper, gets ubiquitous and cheap enough over the course of time, then you're going to see things like that.
It'll never happen.
Well,
not where we're talking. Not where we're talking.
It could be this combination of what Elon Musk is doing with satellites and everything else, and some initiative to tie it all together. But my point is that you can then have the smart windmill that is on the grid that's making contributions even if it's coming from a relatively remote area, and that could transform a lot of stuff.
I mean, 5G for anyone outside of a city is a pipe dream. It'll just maybe along the roads, but it's an incredibly inefficient system. And that's why I'm so bitter that we're spending so much money on it. It's because it's just not going to get to everybody or not get to most people. It's just going to leave them out, and then everyone's going to be excited about 5G. And so I think Elon Musk has a much better solution. It won't fix a lot of real-time issues, but it'll get a lot more people connected. Go ahead, George.
Alex, so question is, how much of a threat is Starlink to, let's say, Fios and Comcast? Because here in DC, Google Fiber is not able to penetrate this market because obviously there's a fight always between Verizon and Comcast, and there's rules in DC that prevents other from ISPs from coming in. So I think it's more attractive for a lot of folks Starlink in the future.
I think that the issue is that Starlink isn't going to be able to manage real time what we're doing here. Everybody we've talked to so far that's tested Starlink has not found that synchronous video communication has been very successful. Lots of frame dropping, lots of, breakup. If you think Wi-Fi is bad, Starlink is on a whole different level. And so that's been the main fallback. I think for folks in the rural area, I think it's going to be huge. I think that, our government would save a lot of money. I'm going to say one thing, only because it's related to what we do. One politics thing is we'd save a lot of money if we stopped spending a lot of money on broadband and the government started pounding on the, on the actual cable companies. They need to be broken up. I mean, this is the perfect example of an oligarchy or a monopoly, and we're all paying for it. And I think that it's clear and present that we as individuals are paying way more and getting way less because of an oligarchy. And this is a clear, I'm not usually I'm very much like government should stay out of everything except for when they're clearly taking advantage and manipulating their position for this, and because it affects our business, I'm mentioning it here, but I'll stay out of it otherwise. But the government should, that's how you get this done. And basically if they can't figure it out, they should just make them all utilities. Go ahead, Al.
Having my wife as an educator, it really comes down to what we call equity, because there's there's no fairness in this industry at all. And I think we still need our governments to have some form of standards in order to, make sure that everybody follows those standards and make sure everybody's treated equally.
Going into the future, the biggest thing that any government and anywhere in the world could do is put fiber into every house. Not broadband, not fast, not wireless, not 5G, glass into every house, because that means that you can keep on scaling. As the capacity goes, it would be a one-time, hugely expensive thing to do in many countries, but it then puts their entire population at a level, and it should be like a utility. Just you're going to get glass to the house, and in 10 years it'll be 10 gigs instead of 1 gig, and that's what it would transform the country, because we shouldn't be trying to figure out how to get manufacturing back. We should figure out how to do the new digital manufacturing. Next question.
Greg Gibson, Washington, D.C. With regard to the countdown timer discussion, we've had several shows where we had to delay the start due to missing participants. Does it create more or less issues with the audience if the timer countdown is adjusted in progress?
We slide it. It's fun. The audience, if you watch the comments, everyone's like, ah, ha, 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 ha. They're not ready. So the way I look at it after doing hundreds of these is that number one is I try not to start the countdown clock until I know that we're going to start on time. I do the best I can. But as you know, hosts aren't ready. It's almost always the talent that isn't ready. We're ready. We're sitting there waiting. They're not coming in on time. We do have a slide that says starting soon if we really don't know. Like if it's just stuck, we're stuck. But we try not to keep it there for very long. So usually we'll scroll it back. It's basically keeping our commitment to the audience to know what's happening. So when we scroll it back, they now know that something's happening, and a lot of them are still coming in. You have to remember that a lot of people at the top of the hour might be still rolling in. They didn't see the countdown clock before. And the best thing to do is to change that countdown clock before you get to the top of the hour, because that's when the most number of people are coming in, or 5 minutes before. You want to scroll back a little bit, to get that working, so that because most of your viewers will never know that happened. They'll just know that, I came at 5 and it's actually going to start at 5:06. But anytime you go to something not moving, a clock not moving, people leave. You're competing with so many things on their computer that they just, you got to keep something moving. And again, by the way, for encoders, you want music, and if you can, I mean, a lot of them are stills because of the nature of things, but if you can, you want the image to be moving slowly, and to keep music going through it, especially if you're going to something like YouTube, because YouTube, the player with a still and a countdown, and a still, the countdown clock will sometimes keep it alive, but if you go to a still on YouTube, the player will jump back and forth between primary and backup constantly because it thinks there's something wrong. So the player will go, oh, this isn't right. Oh, this isn't right. And now what you end up with is truly everybody out there is on. Half of them are on backup and half of them are on thing, and they're seeing stalls because it's going like this all the time because it's panicking. So it does create a race condition, for the player if you go into a still. Go ahead, George.
So at what point, obviously at venue, you can make a voice of God announcement. For live streams, we've had to do, because we've gone over now 1300, we've had to turn a voice of God announcement on the web. Would you have content prepared to play back? Do you advise your clients to maybe have content if you know you're going to go past 10 minutes start time if you really having an issue?
We try to have videos, in those areas that we can go to. We've had a lot of like we'll be right back videos that are really fun. Little guys running around trying to put things back together, trying to and so little cartoons and stuff that people can play, people enjoy. It's definitely we don't always have that because we just don't have the budget or time from the client to do something. So you just end up with a countdown clock that you have to reset. So it's not when you can, if you have the budget, money, time, then absolutely create backup assets to make that work. Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I asked the question because a lot of times, I mean, I'm dealing with just in the nature of what I do, I deal with a lot of members of Congress and government officials, and sometimes you just never know when you're going to get those guys, and so sometimes they'll join in progress. And so we've been a little bit hesitant to use a countdown timer in those situations, just because sometimes we do have to delay start. But we've also had situations where, we just went ahead and rolled the dice and had somebody fill the time.
I would rather fill the time every single time. If you have a host that can tap dance, you're better off having them tap dance in front of people. The other thing is open it up for comments and questions immediately. Just like, hey, hi everybody, we're here. What do you got? What are your questions? Where are you coming in from? Like, oh, I see you're coming in from da-da-da. So some kind of loose start to pull it off is always going to be better. But again, when you're dealing with government officials, they're afraid of off message and picking the wrong questions or the wrong person. And, so those are other things to, consider, but you're absolutely right. It's a tricky thing. And we really try to manage our clients as best we can, but I had a lot of experience in your area. That's hard. Next question.
Comes from Charles Klein here on the panel. And Charles wants to know, Alex, if you have tested the Matterport 3D camera yet.
I have not tested the new Matterport. I used to own an older Matterport. A Matterport is a little scanner that you can go through a location. It'll just scan. It'll build a tour, and it's pretty cool. It'll actually build a tour as you go through it, and it connects to your iPad, and you can just have your iPad just slowly build a floor plan, and it'll actually scan the space. In the last Matterport, the digitization, what I really wanted was 3D models, weren't that good. They were like, it's okay. Compared to what and admittedly, I'm used to a LiDAR, but at this point, the iPhone, in a lot of ways with Polycam is better. I'm getting better geometry from Polycam than I was from the Matterport, because of the Polycam, you can move seamlessly around. The Matterport's it's one point of view, so it casts lots of shadows from its place, and you can kind of walk around. But we use the Matterport a lot for scene things, and you can build little walkthroughs and everything else. It's pretty slick. It is a great step between your iPhone. I mean, because what it does that the iPhone doesn't is build that floor plan, let you walk through it, have it easy to throw up on a web page. If you're trying to figure those things out, it's a pretty slick solution that I would say is a step between your iPhone and a BLK 360, which is what we try to use on site when we can. Next question.
Jake Barron of Rockford, probably Illinois, says, we would like to enable automatic captioning on our YouTube live streams. We have to have 1,000 subscribers for this feature to be available. How ethical or sketchy would it be to purchase subscribers in order to get the feature? Is this even legal?
It might be illegal. It's definitely against your terms of service. Go ahead, Craig.
I actually think that limit has been raised. I think the limit is 10,000 now to get live captioning from YouTube.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think that it's a terms of service issue. I think is the issue. They could, if they figure out, and Google's pretty smart. Like they can see where the subscriptions are coming from. So you just got to be careful of having you could have your entire account invalidated by doing that. So I would be super careful. Mickey?
Yeah, exactly what you said, Alex. Like, don't trust on that account for paid work if you do go that route.
Yeah. Thinking that you're tricky when you're going up against the Google Eye is complicated. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question because we're going to have to go really fast through these last ones to go to Supersource. Next question. We're going to go about 5 minutes over.
Bill Alexi, Fort Worth, Texas, is in with, what are your recommendations for breaking into NDI? The options for encoders have varied recommendations. Looking at a 2-camera setup for a political forum debate that will be live streamed from a college campus with various cabling challenges.
Okay, we'll let Jeff just take this one. Go ahead, Jeff, real quick.
Real simple. The new mini TriCaster with a mini TriCaster 4K. It's just perfect for NDI workflows.
What cameras?
Camera wise, it just depends. He didn't actually say he was looking for cameras specifically, but I would put PTZs on them, honestly, for something like this. No. No.
Which ones would you use? Which PTZs?
Panasonics. No,
Okay.
I lean towards Panasonic solutions. They just work.
Okay.
And you don't want to fight that over the network.
Next question.
Bill Hobson, San Jose, California says, for outdoor events on artificial grass, what do you use to cover your SDI cables for a fixed position of 75 foot? Looking at 1/8-inch thick rubber runs, but concerned 12-inch width will not be safe. Any suggestions?
Go ahead, Al, and then Jeff.
Yeah, nothing's going to be safe. The minute you put cables on the ground, there's always a chance of people tripping over them. Just use, if you can find some, there are some consumer cable mats and stuff like that, but they're going to end up being higher than your cables. So you're going to have to figure out some way of maybe going wireless if you can. That's probably your best way if you can.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Completely disagree. Don't do wireless. Not if it's a front of house position like that. They will most likely have, if they're doing live sound instead of stadium type of situation or on a field like that, then yellow jackets all the way across, but the big 5-channel yellow jackets, not the single channels. And if they still move, do what we had to do across a couple streets because we had to cross the streets, come back with a Hilti gun, which is a specific type of gun that fires nails using 22s, like 22 bullets, kind of compression things. Kind of fun, actually. But do that late at night. Don't do it during the middle of the day. Trust me.
If the artificial, I'm assuming that you're going down on artificial grass that already exists. If it doesn't, and you're part of the design crew, what we do is we lift the entire thing up an inch. So there are cable, basically platforms that let all the cables run underneath. And so I think the ones we typically get are 1.5 inches up, and you can rent them, and they'll come in and just run the entire thing. If you look at a concert, like concerts that we've worked on, like Metallica and stuff like that, they just raise the entire stadium base up by 1.5 inches, and then all their cable runs go underneath it. And so it's not the cheapest, but you didn't say cheap. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, completely agree with Jeff with regards to yellow jackets. Just make sure that you plan things accordingly with the entire production and do not run your SDI cables with power, because yellow jackets will keep them parallel, which produces crosstalk.
Next question.
Edwin R. Ruiz is back from Chicago. I have 2 Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6Ks and 1 4K and an ATEM ISO, Extreme ISO. Is it possible to get 60 frames per second from the camera into the ATEM and stream at 60 FPS?
I think so. It should be. I mean, the ATEM does 1080p 60. It's built for gaming, so I mean that's one of their major markets. And it should be able to stream 60 frames a second if you have the bandwidth. Yeah. So yeah, that should work. Next question.
This is cool. It's from Sam in Norfolk, Virginia at the NATO Video Recording Studio SACT JFD. That sounds exciting. Looking for a way to indicate to my in-studio guests when their microphones are muted in the audio mixing board. All the tally light solutions I can find are controlled by the video switcher, but my audio is routed separately.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
We would use our Sienna processing engine workflow. So the return video going back to them, we would put an overlay on them at that point. That is triggered off of the GPI or tally interface coming from the video switcher usually. But if it's a true properly designed, you can easily interrupt that signal and trigger it yourself.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, a lot of mixers also have GPI interfaces and also RS-232 interfaces that you can program to send a light if you unmute a specific channel.
And the GPIO is where we would go, and probably that's a relatively straightforward way to get out of it. We've done a lot of things with that, where we, for instance, integrate a mixer with a switcher, so that the switcher switches, or the mixer changes scenes when the switcher changes scenes. And the reason you would do that is if you're doing 360 video where every time you move spaces, the surround has to change. So GPIO is a really powerful way to get back and forth between devices and Tally. Next question.
Gabriel Ung in Malaysia. Haven't seen you in a while. Welcome back. Camcorders have zooms that range from 12x to 20x. How does that translate to focal length or measurements to determine how much zoom I need? And he's trying to get a mid shot of a presenter 100 feet away from the camera.
Go ahead, Jeff. You're muted, Jeff.
I hit it twice, sorry. I hate to plug a specific vendor, but B&H has some of the best information underneath their lenses and their camcorders. They'll say a 35 millimeter equivalent. That's starting one, but if you're doing 100 feet, you need a big lens. A 22X is not going to make it.
Yeah, you need the equivalent of about a 2,000 millimeter lens on a Super 35. I mean, not that I've needed to do that. Next question.
Roberto Burrow, Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. I'm trying to get my head around connecting QLab to our X32 to controlling it during our church service. Does anyone recall which office hour, second hour, did Lawrence explaining QLab?
Maybe someone can put that in Mukana. We did have a QLab session, so I would go back. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, and just to get the Roberto on the track, the X32 line is capable of receiving OSC commands from programs like QLab, and Behringer has a very detailed wiki on the specific OSC commands that you need to send out.
Next question.
And the last one before we get to our SuperSource discussion comes from Jonathan Swan in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Is there a way to program a keyboard shortcut to mute your mic on Zoom without requiring Zoom to be your active window? I know we all have hardware mutes, but our participants appreciate the visual indication of the mute symbol in Zoom.
Go ahead, Felipe. Yeah, go ahead.
You can set a global shortcut on Zoom, and Jason suggested the F19 on the keyboard for those who have the numerical keyboard, and works well.
Interesting. You're getting a little bit of an echo, Felipe. I'm not sure exactly why. Go ahead, Leland.
Just to elaborate on that global shortcut, it's a small checkbox next to the keyboard shortcut settings in the back end of Zoom. So you just have to make sure that that checkbox is checked for it to be something that will work when you're not focused in the Zoom window.
All right. Let's shift gears and start talking about SuperSources. And so I realized I meant to pull together a bunch of examples of SuperSources, but I didn't really pull that up. But a SuperSource, essentially what we're talking about, just to kind of set the thing, and then we'll start going into it. And I'll jump to you, Jeff, in a second. Is basically, if you think about a screen, you'll have like lower third or whatever, and you'll see this in the news all the time. You've got your host, and then you've got two people that they're talking to. This is what we would define as a SuperSource, and it's defined as different things depending on what app. We're calling it SuperSource because a lot of us have ATEMs, and that's what it's called inside of that. And the new Mini Extremes have SuperSources, which is like the least expensive way you can get a SuperSource these days in hardware. Now you can also do things like a SuperSource can also be a person next to their PowerPoint screen, and that can be a SuperSource as well. Typically, the SuperSource is multiple boxes that are there, and then if it's a single box that you're moving around, we typically define it as a DVE. So anyway, that's kind of the basic what we're actually talking about here. And Jeff, you want to add anything to that?
That's exactly what I wanted to add. Is like from my experience, we called those DVEs. There is a brand that calls it SuperSource. If you are a user of that brand and you're in that world specifically, everybody will understand what you're saying. But if you walk up to a real TD, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be condescending, but if you work up to a professional TD, a truck TD especially, on a Ross, on a Grass Valley, and you say SuperSource, you just pigeonholed yourself and put yourself in a corner. Refer to it as a look, a comp, a DVE effect, an ME. We use ME a lot because those don't mean the same things to everybody. So calling it SuperSource is the ATEM crowd, basically.
Right. Although at this point, what we're finding with a lot of our TDs is more and more of them know know what an ATEM is, because the truck work is much less and the ATEM work is much more. It's like what we saw in Hollywood.
I would agree.
What we saw in Hollywood with Final Cut. It was like all these Avid folks that and then suddenly all the editors were using Final Cut at home. They were using Avid at work and Final Cut at home, and what we're seeing now is all these editors are using. They might be using something in a truck, but a large portion, a growing portion of their business is on an ATEM. So they translate better than they used to. You're absolutely right. 2 or 3 years ago, it was completely like they wouldn't even know what that was. They didn't even know what an ATEM was, and that's changed a lot. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I can remember last summer at some point I asked you flat out, was that a brand name thing? I knew what you meant.
Mhm.
It makes sense. There are different buzzwords and things that you can call it, but it makes sense. I just figured it was, your, little buzzword that you like to
Right.
use for
Yeah. Not my buzzword.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
then I realized, oh, it's an ATEM branded thing.
Well, and one of the things that is important as we start to move down that path is why one of the reasons Jeff was talking about why it might be called an ME is because a lot of times people ask, well, why would I need so many MEs on a switcher? Like, why do I only need one ME? Supersources, or whatever we want to call them, looks and comps and MEs oftentimes live in those MEs. So they, you build up an ME in one of those Supersources, and now that is something I can cut to. So what you'll have is you have let's just say your main program is ME1. You may have a dedicated Supersource that is ME3. In fact, if you look at Mad in the Kitchen last week, I had essentially I had different looks for each one of these, and in here I'm cutting to my individual, or what I'm cutting to is one button is this one button is this one button is this one, and I can then work with those ones as I need to, but I'm not working with it in the program. And so, and the cool thing is that, and what we're kind of moving towards, we've got some security issues that we're working through, but soon we're going to be able to have a team that's able to log into the switcher and be working with these different MEs while I'm cutting a show, or whoever's cutting the show. I'm cutting the show, and those MEs are just being continually reworked by someone else, most likely Aaron, who's been working on the graphics. And so the idea is that person will be in there changing lower thirds, changing who's in those boxes, changing. Now, the other thing you can do when you think about it is you have the other way you might use those MEs, and this is why you might get into an 8 ME switcher, or a bigger switcher than that, is that you can have your host, and then you have this window that they're talking about. I may not want that to be a camera in that window. So what I'll do is, let's do this again. My ME2 is this Supersource, right? This is ME2. My ME1 is my one-ups, and that Supersource is one of the buttons. But ME3, this is ME3. So literally I'm switching a show for that box that goes into that show. So that's another way to think about how, and this can be ME2, and this could even be ME4. So now I have 2 other shows being switched into the windows that I'm looking at that are then passed into and then this one is simply a button inside of my main ME. This is also an argument for why people like me say the extreme ISO is really cool. I really like to have a couple of them, and I may start stacking some of those switchers together. Specifically, is because now I can have, I can sit there and just tap on one input inside that switcher. I can say that input's here, and then I can say I can just hit a hardware button that says this is what I want in that switcher, in that input. Go ahead, Sky.
Your head was down, but Guy was showing last week's show. I don't know if that's a useful illustration.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I don't know if Guy could bring that back up, but
there's one thing to show here that I will admit that I enjoy doing. It makes it harder, and it makes some folks that I work with in trucks makes their head pop a little bit because they're not used to putting graphics over top of they're not used to round corners. When I do round corners, I get a lot of questions from guys that I work with, like, where'd you get those round corners? Because they're used to putting the videos over top of the graphics. Like the graphics are all bordered, and they put them in. It's a lot easier to do it that way. So when you just see an edged border, with a hard edge on it, it's a lot easier to move around. It's a lot easier to build. This is actually pretty constraining because you're putting a graphic with alpha over top of the video placement, to make that work. And so this is a little bit more difficult to do. Now this one's also harder because this is not just a SuperSource. So in this case, let me see if I can, do I have this? Yeah, hold on, I can do this. Whoop. Oh, this will take me just a second.
And are we doing Zoom chefs this week? Zoom cooks?
Zoom chefs are invited, absolutely.
Awesome.
Oh.
Because I know we have a new SuperSource for that with a big giant bucket for them. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And so,
Aaron, by the way, Aaron is doing awesome. So happy to hear that.
Absolutely. And I was going to try to do something, but I have lost it. Oh, there it is. Can you go back to that SuperSource? All right. So, this won't work because now I'm going. Anyway, so
you have to pin it on your end.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, hold on. Let me pin this. Second screen.
That's
all
great.
right. So
you're talking to Manila. You're in California. You ask this is awesome.
So anyway, so one thing here is this is a SuperSource in this case, and these are DVEs. So to make it more complicated, because you can't do. The reason I did that was that I can't do 5 super limited to the ATEM. If you're in vMix or you're in Sienna or whatever else, you can do lots of things. But inside of this, so I had to split these up to make that work. And this does get into, I want to freely say that this gets into the limitations of hardware. The limitation of hardware is that it does a limited number of things. You start getting to software, you can have unlimited MEs, you can have, all virtual MEs and all those other things. The issue you get into is, at least on premises, is that you can ask when you start doing those things, you can ask your computer to do more than it's capable of. Whereas hardware switcher will only do what it says it can do, but it generally does that. Go ahead, Chris, and then Felipe.
I will say that when I used to switch live shows, yes, the mindset was you squeeze, crop, position your DVEs over elements. When I started in post about 25 years ago, it absolutely made more sense to just key the graphic over because we're doing smaller finesses. I have a hole and I can reframe underneath the hole, which you don't have time to do live anyway. But I just recently delivered a bunch of graphics to a control center, whatever, and they said no, they didn't want the holes. I'm like, really?
Yeah, because so the thing is that what makes that hard is that you really are stuck in that hole, that you have to make it work. Whereas the other thing to remember is that the easiest SuperSource and what you see mostly on like Sunday morning TV and stuff like that are windows with a border on them, placed where they want them, like place over top of a background that's general, that isn't custom to where the window is. That means that they can very quickly just define where all those windows are, and they don't have to place them perfectly. They just place them in a line. Yeah, you can see it there. Leland's showing like it's got a border, and if you look at most SuperSources on TV, that's what you're looking at. Because it's just easier, it's much easier and much more practical than what we're talking about. Go ahead, Felipe.
Yeah, one advantage of having the foreground is actually being able to easily scale and get rid of the extra stuff from Zoom, right? But then the disadvantage of that is not being able to do a flying key. So you can't do easily an animated crop like this, for example, right, if you have the foreground. So
Yep. And if you look at, and for some reason, Felipe, you're still giving us some kind of audio return. We're getting ourselves back from you. And if you're able to jump to one where Madeline is inserted over probably Carrie, there's a place in there where you'll see Madeline as a small window and Carrie as a large window, or somebody as a large window. It might have been. There's a couple of places where we did that, and I'm
scrubbing through. I'm not.
It might be.
Do you remember?
I would go to the beginning. Beginning is probably more.
Okay.
Yeah, it's where we were doing kind of introductions.
Here we go. There.
So yeah, this one's a little tricky. So I guess that's the one we did there. You can, you can do all kinds of interesting things where you start overlapping those. The tricky thing here is you got to make this border. The border there has to be thick enough to cover the fact that there's a hard edge underneath it. so the border, if you make that thin border, you have to key it in a way that will key correctly. So those are other things that you want to kind of think through.
And
so
I'm also recognizing that pink is different than how. Is that a zoom issue? Because it feels much more magenta than what I remember.
Zoom translates the color.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But that's not. That's in Zoom here. You can look at YouTube. It didn't do it there because it went straight to YouTube from our stream.
Correct.
So it's not being transformed there. It's just being transformed here while we're looking at it. So I mean, one of the things. Let's go ahead and I know that we have questions building up. So we've kind of given you kind of the introduction, but let's go ahead and jump into questions.
Sure. Scott Mueller has the first one. It's actually a question that was asked in the other show, but I think it may still be relevant. Scott in Clinton Corners, New York says, how would I create a background that has a countdown timer and a dynamic list of 5 names of attendees that have indicated that they want to share? Line 1, the name of the current sharer, 2 to 5 next in line to share. The source will be the Zoom webinar side by side with the current speaker. And he notes the timer is to signify how long each speaker has left to share.
Well, I think that number one is I probably wouldn't post that much information outwardly, to someone. I would probably want to show that inwardly to the speakers, of what they have to share. I mean, you can decide how much peer pressure you want to put on people to get it right. And I guess if it's a political thing, maybe you're showing that. But I think that burning that into the graphics is not something that I would typically do. There's a lot of movement going on there. Like you'll see people disappear, they drop out and then reappear. And all of this stuff is stuff that would be a Zoom OSC kind of thing where you're going to use Zoom OSC to go in and pull the, basically pull the Zoom interface and decide what you're doing there for a webinar. But I think that, so I think that the webinar is kind of where you would go with that. I will admit that we're a bit more controlling about our graphics and who shows up on the show, that I will almost never bring in somebody I don't know over video. And it's only because I did 1,000 Hangouts and I got to see what happens when I do that. And so I have a lot of deep scars in allowing random viewers to show up in a show. And once you've had a couple of my experiences, you never want to do it again. It's a really molecule rearranging experience. And, even though you haven't had that problem yet, I would highly recommend against it. Go ahead, Jeff.
In the aspect of actually creating this on the technical side, not thinking the theory side, as Alex, I agree with you completely, by the way. Always control who's on the air. But on the technical side, one of the things you could use is a real CG like a Chiron, or even on the cheaper side, the CharacterWorks, that is driven off of data, and then you're just updating that data off of the XML, and then that's a layer on top of your quote ME, SuperSource, whatever you want to call it. That's the most powerful way. That way it's independent and you can update it, but definitely not burnt in. No, it would need to be dynamic.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
One step down from that would be New Blue. I could do this with New Blue, although it would be a little wonky.
Softron has a CG generator that also will tie into a variety of different data pools on the Mac if you're looking for that. Next question.
Comes from George E. Kennedy Jr. here in the panel from Washington, D.C., and he wants the panel's opinions on why you might build your SuperSource in Photoshop versus a native app like vMix.
In general, building it into the native app makes more sense because it's going to be, you can move things around. Like you can keep on updating it. But if you're really building something in high detail, you'll have a hard time getting it looking as good as you would in Photoshop. But that kind of nails your feet to the ground. The ones that we're using are actually images, but they're put out of motion because they're all dynamically generated in motion that has tools that are better than Photoshop to do. Go ahead, George, and then Greg.
So my constant workflow is really building those pieces in Illustrator. So if I know I'm going to be using 16:9 frames, vertical frames, I'll build them in Illustrator first, and then build my layout in Photoshop, and export a PNG into vMix. So I have a little bit of control, but I'm just curious what everyone else is doing as far as custom builds.
I build them all in motion because everything's dynamic. So I have holes, and I can, in motion, I can sit there and just move things around. I can change everything really fast. I can move all the stuff around very, very easily. And especially when you look at, again, Alex Goldner's, overview, you can change all the names. You can change all the things that would take a long time in Illustrator or Photoshop to do. I can do instantly, and I can, and then just hit export and punch them all out. So it's, for Supersources, I find motion at $50 on the Mac to be the most cost efficient way to build my graphics. I can also do things like if I want a soft moving background, on my behind the images that are there, that's all generated by replicators. It can be, you can just create it and have it moving and export it out and have it. And you can, most importantly with motion, you can loop it. So you can say, I have a 2-second window of this and it's looping at 2 seconds, and all those replicators will loop what they're doing every 2 seconds. And that is, and if you want to get really complicated, make it 6 seconds long and have some ending at this time and some ending at this time. And you'll end up with a situation where there's a lot of things changing and almost never come back to zero, but they all come back to a right place at the end of the six seconds. It's pretty powerful. Go ahead, Greg.
I do a lot of my stuff in Photoshop, and mainly because there's just little enhancements that I want to be able to add that I can't get in a native app like vMix, for example. I'm a big fan of drop shadow, so I like to put just a little soft drop shadow on a lot of my boxes. vMix just added the border, so that's less of an issue now than it used to be. So it's really easy to get borders inside of vMix. The other thing too is like with the Photoshop stuff, and I don't know if it's the same with all the other apps that you have. I've built up a huge library now of assets. So I have like a variety of different screen assets that I can go back to now. And so it takes me a lot less time to build a set now than it used to, because I can easily just kind of pop those things in and out.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris?
Without a doubt, Alex's Goldner's demo of what he did in motion is mind-blowing. But I will also say that Keynote can export a file with a transparency, so that's worth looking into. And also, George, I would recommend, because I do this a lot, I actually build a lot of stuff in After Effects. Even though I'm not animating it, the alignment tools and the ability, the most important tool is the ability to replace an asset by holding down the Option key when you drag it in, and it retains all the what's it called, the attributes of the one that's in your timeline. It's very easy to like change out a bunch of lower thirds, and then I believe it's Command Option S will kick out your predetermined still version. So you preset your export tool to export PNGs. Boom, you kick them out super fast. They'll have a time code number at the end of it, but who cares? But the bottom line is there's a lot of tools in terms of building graphics with transparency. What you're really looking for is the layout and alignment tools, and can you do them quickly?
And I mean, I probably would have used Keynote a lot more. I didn't know it did transparency exports until like a month ago. I've had it forever. Like it didn't even occur to me.
By the way, that's how I've been doing the lower Fenwicks. And maybe today after the show, in the post show, somebody was asking to show how I do that in Keynote, and I could do that in the post show.
Yeah, sounds good. Go ahead, Sky.
And Brian Anderson also has a lot of those magic tips too. So Chris, if you and Brian could do a thing together, that would be Brian spent an hour with me doing things that I still, it's like magic, alchemy.
In Keynote?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next question. It's just amazing.
Dan Huber, Erie, Pennsylvania, says, is there a way to do SuperSource simply? Asked Sally into the seashore, without an ATEM Extreme with a zoom room, maybe?
Multi-pin. Like that's the multi-pin by Zoom, and then Zoom OSC. I mean, Zoom OSC could help you build. It'll be a SuperSource in the sense that it's bouncing around. It'll give you multiple people in video, but as far as adding graphics, you probably wouldn't be able to do that. Go ahead, Leland.
I was just going to mention that same regard, kind of how we did before. You can put a template over a Zoom window is what he's kind of referring to, I think, where you could build any graphic you want over it and move what's in the Zoom behind it.
Next question.
Hazmat Gijar, Cape Town, our friend, says, explain what is meant by MEs, mix effects, and DVE, digital video effects.
I mean, the main thing you want to think about as a mix effect is really that's a bus. It's a bus of how you're going to mix these videos together. So if you have a 4ME, you've got 4 buses, and technically you have 4.5, but you have 4 buses that are where the videos are totally independent switches that are going, well, mostly independent switches that are going on in the switcher. The DVE is a digital video effect, and so it might be it's typically I want to put one video in this part of the screen, or I might want to move it, animate it across the screen. But that's typically what's referred to as a DVE in a mix effects bus. Because mix effects is usually really set fully as a mix effects bus, and that just means it's a lane of video that you're be able to switch between sources. Let's move. Oh yeah, go ahead, Bill. Go ahead.
Well, I just wondered if it'd be fair for people to define a bus as a place where various circuits come together in.
It's not really what they come together, but it's a lane. You want to think of it as a lane for video or a lane for audio. That is a lane of and everything's going into their lane. They can share lanes at times, but each one has their own. Like we're all doing this independently. Next question.
Dan Huber, Erie Beck what's the difference between a SuperSource and when you describe a 2-up or 3-up? Just the graphics?
I mean, they're kind of interchangeable in the way we talk about them. I mean, a 2-up or 3-up is more specific to that. I mean, they are a 3-up or a 2-up is a SuperSource. Like that's kind of. But we just call it that because you can say SuperSource, and that can mean a lot of things. If you say a 2-up, I think most people understand what that means. Next question.
Alex Goldner, London, England, says most SuperSources I see in TV aren't limited to the 16:9 aspect ratio sources. Why can't you have a center cut 2:3 source or smaller commentary over a larger 16:9 source?
I can say why we don't do it in Mad in the Kitchen. It's because people are cooking. So we need we don't know where they're going to be in the frame. So the only time you can do those center cuts or side cuts or whatever is when you know that they're going to stay in the middle of the frame. So now I can pull them in if they were. So when we do talking heads on CNN or BBC or whatever, we can cut it. Yeah. See? Like that, like Guy has. But if I go like this, not nearly as good.
Those are center cuts right there, so you guys can see what happens.
So there's a center cut. But if I go, I'm going to cook over here. Now I go over here, and now I'm out of frame. And that's the problem with center cuts inside of something where everybody is active. So the reason that we are specifically caught up in that because everybody in the frame is doing something. It's a very unusual problem, specifically for the show that we're working on. And I have to go and let you guys talk amongst yourselves. So I'm gonna wander off. I'm gonna warn everybody that literally to start the meeting, the next meeting, I have to pull over on my way down to San Francisco, open up my phone and do it. So I'm gonna do it as close to 9 o'clock as possible. So as I'm driving, I'm gonna pull over. I'm gonna start it, but just know that if you're in the middle of a sentence at 9 o'clock or at some point in time, I'm not gonna come in and say hi. I'm just gonna just push the other meeting through to get you in. So all right, bye guys.
Bye, Alex. Thanks so much. Moving on to the next. Go ahead. Do you want to say something, Sky?
Drive safe. Be well.
Fair enough. The next question comes in from Alex Goldner again in London, who says, could one of the sources be a Mac running a dynamic motion project, which adds animations and elements on an ad hoc basis using off-screen controls? So, Jeff, do you want to take that, or is there somebody else who works with these a lot who knows how easily that's possible? Oh, Jeff's on a phone call right now. So Chris is going to take it. Go, Chris.
Yeah, totally easy. If you think about what the SuperSource is, or whether you're compositing something in a mix effects bus, you have a background element, you have the overlays, which is the boxes, and that is what Blackmagic calls a SuperSource. But what we often do here, and what Alex often talks about, is then overlaying another key on top of that, which is a image that has alpha channel holes in it. So if your background element wanted to be any one of those sources, just feed a Mac into it. And what is
I see
Felipe
both Guy
showing?
Cochran and Felipe Baez both are doing something on their screens. Guy, do you want to jump in and talk about what you're building there?
Yeah, this is just to show that example. This is vMix with a merge transition. This is just one of the built-in ones. I know Greg does a lot of these and knows how to really build them. I'm just kind of learning. So this is pretty cool though. One feed, you just select what you want and then throw a background in the back. That could be playout B, that could be an NDI source, that could be, a motion project, whatever you want. And you
so
could
your
do,
rising light bulbs is the background. Then you've got the gallery view as your main source, and then you're added in as a secondary.
Yep. So that's NDI coming in on that gallery view from a Zoom room, and I can pin anybody or anything onto that screen or replace me pretty quick.
Felipe, you were doing something too. Do you want to go through what you were just preparing?
I was just going through. Now you don't hear yourselves, right? And you don't hear myself.
No, the echo is gone. You're good.
Yeah, thank you. I was just showing here that I could have, the thing is, I don't know if Motion can have an AV out the same way as Final Cut does. But yeah, you could have that coming in into an input of the ATEM and having that animation playing back the same as I do now. And even if you didn't have an AV out, you could crop the sides and the tops and having that playing back there.
Okay, so you're cropping that in as a source. And John Preto, you look like you've set up for something. Do you want to have a comment?
This is OBS running on a Mac. CPU 5.3% of my iMac Pro. This is 10 layers of different. We don't use the term mix effects or DVEs inside software. It's basically using layer terminology, just like Photoshop. And so this is all done inside of OBS except for the spinning globe or the spinning sphere, not sphere, the square
Cubes
up
there. Up in the top?
Cubes are done in After Effects and brought in as a movie and then keyed out. And then I could bring any sources, but Alex is right. You got to be careful of your CPU. You have to, as you build these complex composites, you have to watch your CPU because it will eat it up fast.
And this isn't a template. That's a hand build, right? Because I was just noticing there's a little offset.
Hand built this from the ground up. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Anybody else want to jump in on this before I move to the next question? No. No. Go ahead, Chris.
The question was raised earlier about I think it was Hasmuk who talked about the mix effects buses. If you look at the software for your ATEM, let me just make this a little bit bigger here. Essentially, what you have is this is a mix effects bus. You have a fader to change between the program and preview. And if you look at this, I have the ability to turn on a bunch of keys all at once or turn them off all at once. And in the olden days, each one of those keys would be the one channel of a DVE. In ATEM world, you go to the Supersource tab, and here I can squeeze back 4 different images. And essentially what I do is I say, well, box 1, I want to put this item into it. And in box 2, I want to put this item into it. It's just a software version of what we used to do all the time with routers and switchers and bears. Oh my.
And what level of ATEM are you working with there so that the viewers understand?
That's the extreme ISO.
So that's the extreme ISO. So you have a bunch of sources.
Yeah, and I have all those keys. I have all these keys, but I'm not even using them when I turn on the Supersource, because when I want to see the output of the Supersource, and Felipe can show this better, you literally just come over here to my program bus and say, boom, take the Supersource. And once I hit that button, I'm getting the output of this tab as opposed to turning on a bunch of keys.
And that Supersource button appears on the extreme only, right? It's not on the Pro.
Well, the extreme and above.
Extreme and above. Okay, great. Just want to make sure that people don't buy a standard ATEM Mini and go, where's my SSRC key? I want to do a Supersource. It's not going to be there. So they're all different. Okay, excellent. Looks like Sky is in here. Let's go,
well,
Sky.
with Chris, and again, this might be a complete rabbit trail. If we cut back to Chris's screen, the media and the ability to change different media sources. I think you and I go up to your top tab where it says not palettes, but media player.
I'm seeing media player in the upper right.
Yeah, right there. Now, is there a way of switching the media quicker? I see that you've got MP1 and MP2.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Sky. First of all, media players are video playback, not your stills. Oh no, I take that back.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, they are your stills. What I would do is I would literally log on to the same ATEM from another computer put another human being in a chair in front of that computer, go to your media tab. And now if I want to change the image that's here, I'll just go Fritchie there and Ken there. Boom. So
Scott,
And those
You-
templates are graphics you brought into the media tab.
those are just, they're not even templates. They're just frame grabs.
Frame
They're
grabs,
just, it's just a PNG.
And you're using
and-
black to do a Luma key to
Oh,
toss them over?
no. These are PNGs that have alpha channels.
Alpha channels,
And the
okay.
black portion actually is represented by an alpha channel.
Okay.
so Sky, you can use a Stream Deck to change out your media player rapidly. So you're not limited to switching out your stills. Once you program your Stream Deck, you could just do that on the fly.
Oh, my brain it hurts.
Felipe, you want to?
You should get a Stream Deck, Sky.
I wish I had
I-
a friend named Fenwick.
I can show real quick if you guys want, but basically you can use Companion with the Stream Deck to do the programming, and you can set your buttons to have speaker 1, 2, 3, 4, and each one of those actions is basically changing the media player source. So for example, if I come here and I create a regular button, and in this button here I look for media player, there it is, change media player source. I can change that media player on player 1 to any of the stills, and that's going to be a button that's going to do that. So I'm going to say here speaker 1, and that's what's going to do.
So you're assigning each element a button, or are you toggling up and down? Can you toggle
Yeah,
up?
each element has a button. So for example, if you would have Sky, Chris, and John, I would have a button for each one of them, and in each of these buttons, the action is to change the media player source to the still of the lower third of each one of those.
I like
So then it's always a
Chris's
button
idea of
away.
putting another body on it, but again, this one-man band stuff is starting to.
No, Felipe's
you had
right.
a-
You
had a
can totally
multiple-
do that.
Keenan, you had a multiple display up too. Do you want to walk us through something you've created?
I'm just
Whoops.
running out of bandwidth between the cymbals in my knees and the drum on my back. Keenan, does that count as a quote? I don't think it does. It really doesn't.
I'm just playing. I'm playing with the Supersource, but I actually have a 4-up, and then the thing I wish we could do is preview it, because I'm building it in the software, and I don't see the preview to.
So what's your hardware profile? What boxes are you using?
So I'm using a mini extreme ISO, and then I also have a quad view coming in with 4 other sources. So I'm just kind of playing around with it a little bit. And then I have this one full screen, and then I think I can, yeah, it didn't work. There we go. But I'm still behind it. So it gets exciting. This is
And that's
this
a
is
prior
pretty cool.
capture of Sky. I assume that's not his live shot.
No, that's Sky, his Facebook profile. It's his best picture. So I figured I would put his best foot forward.
My wife took that picture at Starbucks. Thank you.
Felipe's got his hand up again. Go ahead, Felipe.
No, I just wanted to say that you can actually put the Supersource in the multi-viewer. So you can preview what your Supersource looks like on the multi-viewer. And the last thing that you activated there was the 2 DVs, DV 1 and 2, on the picture-in-picture button.
For you guys who do this a lot, how often do you get video feedback because you put a source into itself?
Yeah, it can happen. Yep.
Go ahead, Chris.
What I was also going to show is to change that, and I apologize. Who was it that was just showing? Oh, it was Keenan. So Keenan, in the Supersource tab, if you click on this Art tab, this is where you can choose what the background is to your Supersource. So you had it like key. There you go. So yeah, you had it keyed over your program, but you can change that art. This is actually quite a nice little tab. If you get a box setup that you like, you can copy box 1 to a bunch of other locations, and then make small tweaks to it. If you just have to like say, if you're doing a bunch of portrait headshots, you create one, you copy it, and then you say, okay, slide this one over here, this one over here, this, at least you get the verticals and the width. cut
Al
the same.
Torrance down there has been patiently holding his hand up and watching the blood drain out of his fingers.
I appreciate it.
Go ahead,
That's
Al.
all right. I appreciate it, Bill. Thank you very much. Has anybody played with John Barker's Here to Record stuff? He's got some really good Supersource layout software and stuff like that for Apple and all sorts of goodies. Has anybody played with that enough to
We're getting
get
a
an
lot
opinion?
of thumbs up on the panels, so people must have played with it and like it. Okay, so I think we've pretty much beat this one to death. We've got a couple, 3, 4 more questions, and so we'll have some time to talk about each one. This one comes from Mickey in the Philippines, our friend on the panel. I find that in many cases, mortises for Supersources, and I think he's talking about the frame around things, seem to be a waste of pixels. I much prefer simpler 2-ups, picture-in-pictures and the like. Why are mortises popular, especially with web broadcasts? Go ahead, Chris. And then Leland.
That was Mickey's comment?
That was Mickey's comment from the Philippines.
Okay, so Mickey, first of all, I'm not going to take design ideas from an audio guy. Secondly,
why not?
Secondly, mortise by definition is a thing with a hole in it. So the mortise doesn't necessarily have a border. If you look at
but I think most of us understand it as the skeuomorphic idea of putting some kind of visible frame that kind of has a 3D.
Well, I'm just defining a word here. So these images are mortises because it has a hole in it. The border thing, I'm going to agree with you. I think that a lot of borders are silly, and I think most of the time they exist because the feature exists, and people who are feature happy just click everything, and then you get silly borders.
You give somebody a box of crayons, they will draw in color. That's how it works. Mickey, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess a wrong term. I just thought those things, those graphics were generally called mortises, but yeah, the whole having to graphics around it, but why waste the pixels?
Yeah, technically, a mortise just means a thing with a hole in it. It comes from woodworking, actually, mortise and tenon, but it got co-opted decades ago in television.
The peg in the hole the peg goes in. There you go. Leland, you want to pop in before we move to the next one?
Just the principle behind having a mortise, which is to skin over what you're working with, is in most cases, with these one-off broadcasts, is a matter of branding, just showing your brand, getting people to see who you are, and not think you're just another one in the mix. It pulls you away from the typical crew of those who just put color backgrounds, and you watch that video and you say, who was that I just watched? If you have no recognition of brand, you're never going to remember who it was.
Well, and we've all watched, particularly as the news shows, the CNN type shows of the world have filled up their frame with so many sources, super sources, multiple things, flying keys, God knows what all else. And it gets to the point where sometimes there's so much information on a screen that it's hard to decode. Go ahead, Chris.
There's a famous branding story from somewhere where somebody took a magazine, they opened it up to a Nike ad, and they put it up on a wall or something. And then they literally walked, I believe it was 4 offices away, looking through a series of doorways, and so it was very tiny in their vision, and they could clearly say, "Oh, that's a Nike ad." They couldn't see a single word, they couldn't see the face of the athlete, but you can clearly tell it's a Nike ad. Or think of like a Apple billboard.
Right,
it's clearly an Apple billboard. In the Bay Area, we see a lot of Apple billboards. I know you don't see them as much in the rest of the world, but that's the branding holy grail. Can somebody tell it's you without being able to read a single word on it, without being able to even distinguish anything but shapes and color? Is it
that is
you?
why I've worked on them. You have brand books for corporations that are sometimes 500 pages deep, and they specify exactly how you create every color that you use, not just the primary color, but secondary colors, complementary colors, exactly how big the type needs to be for this thing or that thing, and you get those rules in the industries like in billboards, because people are driving by at 60 miles an hour. you can't do much more than
Pixel
7
offsets
words.
from logos.
Yeah, there's just so much detail, and it's trying to do exactly what Chris is saying: establish brand consistency. So no matter how you're going to use their brand, there's a rule for how you should use it over and over, so you never deviate, and that creates a look that people recognize. Go ahead, Sky.
And my understanding of that is systematically, the Starbucks logo started with the icon in the middle, then text on the outside, and then a graphic, lots of verbiage, and now it's just down to a single little icon, and maybe not even all of that, maybe just a little thing of the maiden in the corner. So to your other point of the branding is UPS owns the color brown, even to the point that they told us that. And so when we see that color brown, it's use and repeat. So familiarity breeds. So there it is. That,
well, I think
that
the
single
strength of
logo.
it even goes beyond that, because I know in talking to a lot of corporate execs, they care on their books. I mean, they're literally accounting a line item for goodwill. And as you build a brand relationship with people, that has sometimes value in the hundreds of millions of dollars, because people see the Coca-Cola logo and understand what the taste is going to
Well,
be,
that's
what
all
the
they have.
experience is going to be.
That's all they have is a story. And again, where do we steal the word brand? Well, cowboys knew what it was when they heated up that hot piece of metal and shoved it onto the back flank of a piece of cow.
Yeah,
so
we're going to go ahead and move on. Unless, Chris, did you have a last thing you wanted to toss in before we switch topics?
Bill, you know me, I could talk all day about this, but I will yield my time.
Okay, fair enough. We're going to move on from Mickey's question to Hasmuk's, and Hasmuk in Cape Town says, before ATEM Extreme, with its support for Supersource, how did one or could one set up a Supersource? Jeff, do you want to talk about the history of these things coming in and how it was done kind of when you started out?
Yeah, that's a long story too. Man, there's video toaster days way back when, lots of pain, lots of waiting, lots of time. The DVEs, that was just like you did one DVE. It was a I want to say it was fed into a Grass Valley 110 switcher at the time.
And you were doing everything in 640 by 480, right? Because it was just standard broadcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we didn't even have many pixels to work with. So even type, if you didn't have a big slab-sided font.
And that's a lot of times, that's when you look back in the earlier days of CG and stuff, that's one reason why it was so big, is because the smaller you got, it just went to complete crap, because there wasn't enough pixels there at the time, density wise.
Yeah,
so that's why you end up with a lower third that's like a full lower third, and it's just the name, well, not like the name, the position, the location, and all that. Yeah, there's been a big difference from Hasmuk's question. I would say, for what he suggests or what he asks about, absolutely, it seems like that would be possible. I would put a piece of software in there that would just give it so much more flexibility, instead of doing it with just Zoom or something like that, and scraping it, bringing it in through the hardware. I mean, it's probably possible. I'll lean a different direction with more power.
What do you think? Do you see a future? Are you going to have to switch some of your practices as this kind of equipment changes, and how we're not broadcasting anymore as much as we're webcasting?
No. We are broadcasting. Never forget that. We are all broadcasting. No, don't ever say we're not broadcasting. We're all broadcasting.
We are not necessarily following the NTSC guidelines or the CCAM guidelines of what used to be a broadcast standard signal. We are now on the internet where the rules have all changed.
The colors, I agree with that part as far as like color reliability, and people learn how to either work within those boundaries, or they learn that finally they may actually learn what's legal, what's not legal, what in colors and such. The things that we had to pay attention back in the day and look at a waveform and a vector scope and truly make things in the right place. But my point about the broadcasting thing is that drives me crazy. That is like, so many people out there, they got into the virtual events and such, and they approach it from the presentation side or the AV company side.
Fair point.
they don't realize that no, we are absolutely in a broadcast, and we need the tools that a broadcast would have, such as IFB, real comms, the things that you just take for granted, and fold back and all that stuff that you just have to have it. You can't say that I'm just doing a webcast anymore. You're in a broadcast, and we've been going after that for a long time.
Particularly critical probably now that it's distributed and your audio mixer can be in one country and your vision mixer can be in another country. I would think that becomes even more critical.
Absolutely.
Because in the TV station, one set of engineering brains could set up everything and decide exactly how it was going to function. That has gone away a little bit, although an engineer overseeing this can specify what they want and the equipment they use and the techniques, correct?
Yeah, and that is still happening. There's like one of my clients, the Drone Racing League. They're not the people that are helping on the switching side and all. They're not the technical people. My main contact with them is the technical guy. He's the guy putting all the pieces together. He's with my help in building out all the behind the scenes part, like you said, like they would do in a TV station. And then we have, I'll call it the monkey button pushers, but they're not as quite like Chris. Yeah, exactly like that. That's exactly how most people switch now, right? With a Stream Deck. But
well, the speed of something like drone racing, that's got to be, you've got to be, low latency is everything, because these things are zooming around corners at what seems like 200 miles an hour.
Yeah, and that's, so it's its own challenge. I mean, for them to pull it off was quite a feat. But what my point is saying is that, yeah, there's still a lot of us that are in the engineering fold that are building the structure. And if you build it right, those that are not, quote, engineering type can still produce a very good show because you put the tools in front of them to start with the right way.
Perfect sense. We suddenly have more questions, so I'm going to move on to Hasmuk's from Cape Town. Bringing in a remote talent connected in a peer-to-peer setup in one computer and screen scraping them into a main hosted meeting. Is a SuperSource possible, and is it good practice? I see. There, Chris is saving me. Go ahead, Chris, and then Leland.
You'll potentially the big problem that you'll have to deal with, Hasmuk, that we see a lot of is audio delay. The audio will get out of sync every time you go. Imagine this: every time you go through an HDMI connector, you're going to lose like a frame or two or something. And if your audio doesn't pass with that, it's going to get out of sync. Last week or 2 weeks ago, when Felipe gave his presentation where he brought Stephen Moyer in to his own Zoom instance, and he brought him in there. When we put up the two shot of the two of them, all the audio was coming from the same place. So he kind of had it under control. Had Felipe tried to steal Stephen Moyer's image from one of, or replace Stephen with one of us, we would have ended up being completely out of sync.
Fair enough. We've got 2 more questions and 4 minutes before Alex remotely pulls the plug on us. So I'm moving to Graham Cardwell's question from Northern Ireland. Following up on Jeff's comment, is there a recommended setting for keyed lower thirds? I've been playing with simple text, but it seems you need bold rather than regular or fine to make them legible. Jeff, what are you seeing in terms of the rasters you're working with now and how you have to deal with type?
I'll be honest, I'm the last person to ask about graphics. I can tell you what looks good to me, but it's usually after I've already let the Chris's and those guys work their magic.
Yeah. So we're going to Chris, but I wonder, because there's so many, each device is going to pull what it needs. That's one of the pieces. Is there a standard that you can work with, Chris?
I've been doing graphics for video for 35 years. And in the early part of my career, people would bring me pieces of paper that they had printed out from laser printers and said, I need you to make this on a screen. And I would say to them, you're printing that out on a 600 DPI laser printer that has a pixel count of blah, 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 blah. So what I would say is I will put it on a TV screen and I will make it look awesome as long as you can print it in a rectangle that is 1.4 inches by 1.2 inches, or it was something about that, which was the number of pixels translated to the exact number of pixels in a standard def frame, which is what all we had back then. And it would break their minds. I don't understand. That's why you've hired me. Now you have to listen to me. Well, but it looks fine here, but you have way more pixels than I have access to. How, imagine your crayons are this big instead of, little,
and each one is a bundle of 3 crayons, RGB.
So what you have to do, and Alex mentioned this earlier, you can compose it in Photoshop or whatever you want to do, but then scale it way down and then step back from your monitor. Don't sit there at a giant 5K display with your nose touching the glass and say, well, I can read it. It looks fine.
Hey, we're in our last minute. If we're going to get to A. Mitchell's question in Washington, we got to do it right now. Hopefully we'll get part of it in. Can Alex 4D Goldner show the borderless composition he mentioned in the chat and explain how he built it and what the clients were looking for in terms of needs and wants? Thanks. No, I don't know if we'll be able to. Alex isn't here. I'm suspecting that we're not going to have time to do that, but re-ask that question, A. Mitchell's, when Alex is in the panel. Am I wrong? No, Alex is not in the panel. I'm scanning through there. Sky, you're going to be able to start your question.
I'm just going to ask Mickey to give me his graphics opinion, because I had a great quote for something about a Texas person, but Keenan says I've already hit my quote limit of